Hi, good evening,
Hey, Chelsea.
everyone. Yes. Can you hear me?
No, just making sure that we're both online here.
Yep, I can hear you, and it sounds like you can hear me.
I can.
Hi, everyone who's on the webinar tonight. Thank you for joining. My name is Chelsea Conanan. I'm an associate at Morgan, Lewis & Bockius in our Labor and Employment Department. And also doing this webinar with me is Don Macaulay. He's the president and founder of BARBRI Law Preview. So you've been getting lots of emails from us as part of the P2P program, and we're very happy for you to join us this evening for what will hopefully be a very helpful webinar, especially as you embark on your job searches.
Chelsea, you also have to tell them that you're an employment lawyer too, right? So this is super belt with suspenders, getting interview and resume writing tips from an employment lawyer.
Yeah.
I don't even want to know what your billable rate is, you know?
Usually I'm on the other end when there's an issue, but I can say that I'm part of my firm's recruiting committee. So I've done a lot of interviews, I've added a lot of resumes, I've done a lot of workshops like this. So the way this webinar is designed is to keep it somewhat simplified, and we're going to give you our top 10 tips for writing an effective resume. And kind of guiding you through some of the issues that we see in terms of what works and what doesn't work and how to be an effective, write an effective resume. And the same thing for interviewing, what our top 10 tips are for interviewing when you get to that point. And all of you will, and you're going to succeed and be amazing, and you're going to get the job that you want. So rest assured, this will help you.
And the fact that we're doing this in live time, we can also invite questions. So if in case anybody has a question, you can pop in. I believe that there's a little console for you guys to post a question, and then we'll call you guys out and answer it as we go through it. But Chelsea, I'll let you take it away.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's start with resume writing. Let's talk about my first tip, which is, it seems obvious, but I can't tell you how many people get this wrong. A resume should be one page and one page only. Unless you have 30 years of litigation experience as a federal prosecutor or something of that caliber where it's impossible to put all your accomplishments on one page, you must have your resume at one page. And this is really your first lesson in keeping things succinct, concise, using judgment as to what accomplishments or work experience or things that you might have done in undergrad that you're really going to select and highlight for your resume. Also, don't use any fancy fonts, no images, no colors. I once saw a resume that was on a different colored paper and had a rainbow watermark on it. All of that is distracting. It's unprofessional. So, keep it simple, keep it to one page. You can play with the margins a little bit, but don't do your law school exam cheat sheet and make everything so tiny that you can't read the font.
Right. And also, just because I think that it would also be helpful for a little bit of perspective from the recruiting committee's standpoint. First, how much time do you get to spend looking at somebody's resume, when you're going around the table making a decision about a candidate?
I mean, so when I interview candidates, I probably look at their resume for 5 minutes. 5 minutes before they walk into my office. I mean, usually their application packet has their resume, writing sample, transcript. So I'm trying to review everything. Right. But, I do a quick read of the resume, maybe highlight some things that I want to discuss with the candidate. But that's really it. So that's a great point, Don. We don't have a lot of time to, read every single detail of your resume. So it's got to be short and succinct.
Right. And when you think that other, in addition to interviewing potential, employees, your other job, your day job, right, is to, be profitable and bill for your firm. So,
right.
trying to I think that, really what the one-page resume always said to me was when somebody came to me with a 2-page, or I've even seen a 3-page resume, where I was like, wow, you must really think I have all the time in the world to do this. And, when I was interviewing folks, I'm more than happy. The problem is, as a lawyer, it's not like you're not going to read it. Right, you're
right.
trained to pick up the details and go through everything with a fine-tooth comb. So yeah, if somebody's going to hand you a 2-page resume, shame on them. But I have the obligation to read it, and I will. But it's really just not being mindful of other people's time. Is really what I'm
right.
The way I always felt about it. It's an infringement. I want to go home at the end of the day, not working like I'm apt to do until 2:00 in the morning because somebody's 2-page resume kicked me over for half an hour. Rather than the 5 minutes it would normally take. That's
right.
my 2 cents.
Wonderful. And just to add one more point to that, I mean, we see hundreds of resumes. So we're getting a huge influx of applicants every single year throughout the year. So we, like Don said, we just don't have the bandwidth to flip through, a multi-page resume.
Right.
Okay. So the next tip for resume writing is this is probably one of my favorite tips, tell a story and highlight your accomplishments. What do I mean by tell a story? Well, I mean, you have all these different experiences. Maybe you studied abroad, maybe you have work experience, maybe you wrote an interesting thesis, and somehow that all led you to law school and where you're at now. And so as you're putting together your resume and also preparing for your interviews, you should think of what are the experiences and the skills and the accomplishments that I can highlight for myself that sets me apart from other candidates, and which also makes one cohesive, package or brand. And I'll get to this point a little bit later on. One of the analogies I like to say is pretend you're on an episode of Shark Tank. You have 20 minutes to pitch to your interviewers why you should get the job. And so you really need to think of how you're going to sell yourself, how you're going to sell your skills, how you're going to set yourself apart. And your resume should try to do that as much as possible. Now, not everyone is going to have a perfect, linear path to law school. There might be some gaps in your time between undergrad and law school. You might have varied work experience. You might have majored in something that's, so far afield from law that it might take some explaining. That's okay. And, as reviewers and as recruiters, we like to see that type of diversity. We like to see that you have rich experiences, but tell me what you've learned from them. Tell me what you've accomplished. Tell me what skills you have developed along the way. What makes you stand out? And one more big point about this is always, 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 always highlight your diversity. Our diversity is where we get a lot of our strength. So if you are a part of both LGBT groups, any other type of affinity groups, I would definitely make sure you mention that on your resume, because it's a great indicator of diversity, and I like to see that myself when I recruit candidates.
I think that's great. I have really nothing to add except for again, the story is so, the story is you can't make it up, right? Obviously, you come to this position with, your prior work and academic experience. But, the way I always think of legal recruiting is similar to how an admissions officer sort of thinks about structuring a law school class, right? Where, the admissions officer, the dean of admissions at your various law schools probably looks at themselves more as a coach rather than, somebody who's selling you on coming to their school. They're trying to build a team, right? And, they're looking for people who fit a certain niche and have a certain skill set and or, as Chelsea mentioned, a background that is going to make a rich, diverse, a place where people could come with fresh ideas. That's part of, the creativity of being a lawyer is you come up with creative arguments. And if you had all the same people in the same room, who all looked alike and, came from the same backgrounds, they're not going to be, you won't have an opportunity to have that kind of rich discussion. So I think that, as Chelsea mentioned, the story that you put forth on your resume should highlight, those pieces that say that, hey, this is what I'm going to bring to the team. You need a shortstop? Guess what? I play shortstop, or I'm a utility player. You can put me anywhere. But, and also highlighting the diversity. I think that, it's such an important thing now for law firms, because their clients are demanding it as well. Because the clients want to make sure that the diversity of their lawyers, of their outside counsel, represents the same people that, that work at their company and or the customers that they service. So you'd be remiss if you didn't highlight your diversity on your resume.
So the third tip also seems like an obvious one, but this has actually happened to me in updating my own resume. Is
what you left a typo on your resume, Chelsea? Come on,
I did.
Really?
It was so bad.
Look, you know what that means? You're human, right?
What'd you say?
It happens. I said you're human. It happens to everybody, right?
Yeah, to everyone.
But try not to have it happen to you.
Yeah, try not to happen to you. Proofread, proofread. And I mean really, really sit down print out your resume on paper, because that's the best way to proofread. Take a pencil or pen and go through it line by line and check every word, and then do it again, and then do it in the opposite direction, starting from the bottom, and then get your mom to do it, get your dad to do it, get career services to do it, get a friend to do it. I mean, try to proofread it as much as possible so that you catch any typos, any grammatical errors, any spacing issues or weird formatting issues. Also check gaps in dates and times. That's where my typo came from. So make sure that you have the right time frame for each of your work experiences or schooling or whatever the case may be, because typos are really the kiss of death on a resume. We are all human. We all make them. But when I see a typo on a resume of a candidate that I haven't met yet, to me that indicates that they haven't taken the care to really vet their own resume. And, how do I know that they're going to be the detail-oriented associate that, you need to be to work in my profession? So make sure that you try to catch everything, make it as professional and airtight as you can. And, career services at your school is a great resource. Usually they have folks who can help you not only format the resume, but will do their own proofreading for you. So make sure you take advantage of those resources.
Right. The only other comment I would make on this is, and Law Preview hires folks who come back. So students who took Law Preview last year can come back and work for Law Preview as a student instructor at the various sessions around the country. And I can't tell you how many times, and I guess it's just a matter of, it's not sitting on paper in front of you most of the time anymore. It's, people are just saving it as a PDF and sending it out. But I get them with track changes on it.
Yeah.
And that's definitely a no-no. Like the last thing I need to do is see who's been reading your resume and who's making comments on it. And if you're, like Chelsea said, I want to make sure that people show up and do a good job and are detail oriented. And if that's the indication that they're putting something out with a typo or, God forbid, track changes on your resume, I mean, it just screams bad judgment.
Right. Our fourth tip is that anything on your resume is fair game. And what I mean by that is make sure that you can talk about everything that you put on your resume. That includes, your theses, your community involvement, the organizations that you're involved in, the journals that you're working on, the books that you've read. I've had multiple occasions where I've asked a law student, can you, your senior thesis sounds really interesting. Can you just tell me, a couple sentences about what you argued and where'd you come out on the argument. And, you know, they'll look at me just like a deer caught in headlights because they just don't remember what their argument was.
Right.
So really make sure that, you know, you can speak to any of those things that you put on your resume, because that's, you know, that's what the information we know about you, and that's what we want to talk about. Same thing goes for your writing sample. If you are asked to submit a writing sample, make sure you review the writing sample before your interview so that you can come up with a, you know, succinct explanation for, you know, what the assignment was, what the issue was, and what the legal arguments were. So just think about those things, not only when you're preparing your resume and your application packet, but also preparing for your interview. One other thing on this point, if there's a gap in your resume, so let's say you took some time off between undergrad and law school, and maybe you didn't work, maybe you just studied abroad, or you went abroad, you traveled, maybe you got your yoga certification, you know, whatever the case may be, there's some type of gap that's not easily explainable on your resume. Make sure that you have a story for that and that you can tell the interviewer, well, you know, I needed some time to myself. I needed to, you know, wanted a break before I headed to law school, and here's what I did, and here's what I learned. Bring it back to something that you learned or a skill that you developed.
So when I saw this tip, number 4 of, you know, everything is fair game, it reminded me of my student instructor from last year, a really smart kid, great kid from Howard University, went in for his first interview, and he had chess on his resume. And he comes in the next day after, you know, he was working with me at the law preview session in Atlanta. He's like, you're not going to believe this. The partner calls in an associate who is like a champion chess player. To every move, he had me answer a question. And I was like, wow, that's kind of crazy. And I was like, how'd you do? He's like, oh, I beat him. And I'm like, oh, thank God. But I was halfway thinking, like, Jesus Christ, thank God you didn't say, like, you were a lion tamer or something like that. Like, this guy was actually really calling you out and checking on your resume. So everything is fair game. Even the interests at the bottom, apparently, are fully fair game. That, you know, the kid, you know, got called out on his, you know, his affinity for chess.
Wow, that is intense, but good for him. But
yeah, great for him. And he got the job. And he's actually summering there this year. So.
Oh, that's great. That also reminds me, Dawn, if there is a journal that you're a part of, for instance, I was on the environmental law journal at my law school, and so I, you know, make sure that you look at the last issue that was published just to see what, like, you know, some of the issues are in that field, because I've also asked candidates who are on, you know, law and business or public policy, international law journal, like, oh, what are the hot topics that your journal is covering these days, or, you know, what have you kept abreast of? And sometimes that question stumps people because they don't know, or they're not, you know, they just go there to be able to put it on their resume, but they're not actively involved in learning about that space. So make sure you educate yourself about what your journal is doing, and maybe look at the last issued publication.
Yeah, really good point. Really good point.
The 5th tip is to use active phrasing on your resume, and as opposed to passive phrasing, and give yourself credit for your accomplishments, what you've contributed to teams, you know, any awards that you've won in undergrad or in law school so far. You know, there are some great websites online that you can use that will help you with this. And just so I'm clear, by active phrasing, some examples can include, you know, analyzed, coordinated, achieved, collaborated, solved, researched, formulated, assessed. All of those words show you as an active participant, as someone who's contributing to the success of a particular project or a case or whatever it may be. So make sure you use those those words in your resume, it sounds much better that you're, being proactive and taking initiative than more passive phrasing. And again, if you contributed, if you won an award or there's some substantial accomplishment that you can highlight, make sure that is known on your resume. I mean, I've had candidates who, I don't really know what the issue is. It's almost like they don't realize how powerful certain accomplishments are, but they have forgotten things that they've done and not put them on their resume. I remember one person, I think, had started her own company, and for some reason she didn't indicate that she was, a founding member of this company. And I just looked at her and I said, this is a critical fact. You need to put your full title, underneath the company name, and also make it clear that you founded this. You started this yourself. So make sure you give yourself credit when credit is due.
I love it. Yeah. No other comments on phrasing.
Great. So the sixth tip is to customize your resume for the particular position. And this also applies to any cover letters that you're writing to various employers or firms or organizations. And one way to do this is sometimes resumes, and you'll see an example of my resume actually later on in the slides, is that you can include an introductory paragraph at the beginning of your resume that is specific to the position that you're applying to. Same thing, same concept with your cover note or cover letter. Make sure that you particularize it so that it's clear that you're applying to that particular position. It's very easy to tell when we get like a mail blast of the same form cover letter that is very general, very generic, and has no specifics as to the particular position that's open. So from a labor and employment perspective, if you're applying at my firm into my practice group, I want to know about your labor and employment experience. What will make you a good fit here? Have you worked on discrimination cases? Have you worked on wage and hour cases? Have you worked on, some of the practice that we currently do? So just keep that in mind when you're applying. Make sure you look at the job description, you review it before you send out all those emails to for various positions.
When if somebody's just applying for let's say a 1L summer associate position, or even a 2L summer associate position, are they really applying towards a particular group at your firm, or is it more just like get your foot in the door, figure out what you want to do? Is that something that you would say, like for? I would say
it's more general. Sometimes it's really better. I mean, if they're applying for like if they want to be in our labor and employment group, I would be very specific about that in their cover letter.
Right.
But I think dropping details as to, the firm is helpful. Don't make the mistake of saying that you want to do litigation and the firm has, basically a non-existent litigation department. Or, I've had a candidate and say, I really want to be in your intellectual property group. And I've had to say, well, we don't have that in New York. We have it in D.C. So things like that.
How do you feel about moving?
Yeah, unless you're interested in relocating.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, for 1L positions and to an extent 2L positions, I think your cover letters can probably be more generic, but I would try to insert some details about the firm or maybe indicate, whether you want to practice litigation versus corporate law to kind of distinguish yourself and make it a little bit more specific for the position.
Agreed, yeah.
So the number 7 tip is to use caution when you have an interest section. And Dawn kind of alluded to this before. The interest section, it's usually at the very bottom. It should be at the very bottom of your resume. And some people include that to say, oh, I like cooking, I like traveling, I like reading, I speak these, sometimes they'll put languages that they speak, sometimes it's labeled interests and skills. That section can work to your advantage. I usually like to see it on a resume because I think it adds some flavor to what might otherwise be a boring resume of just work experience and education. It shows some of your personalities. Usually it gives me good talking points, but you need to be skillful in what you choose to include. And by that, I mean, don't just say you're an avid traveler or reader or you like cooking. Basically, everyone in our profession likes those three things. Everyone likes them. So try to pick something unique, but also not too esoteric, but something that will make you stand out. So if you do like traveling, maybe put, what the last big trip you went on was. Or if you do like reading books, maybe put what the last novel you read was, or the specific genre. Same thing with cooking. If you do like cooking, what kinds of cuisines do you like to taste or make, or whatever the case may be. So try to make it a little bit unique. Sometimes I start with the interest section when I'm in an interview, just because it lightens up the interview a bit. It takes some of the anxiety out of the room. But again, use this with caution, because you don't want to just seem like someone who is like everyone else.
Yeah, and also, it also just begs the question of, that's where you really want to be truthful, right? Like, even if you put mountain biking or rock climbing, like, they're clearly not going to ask you to, like, demonstrate your skills, but they might ask you, what was the last time you went, rock climbing? Oh, I love to rock climb. Where do you go? Like, what gym do you use? And all of a sudden, it's really easy. It's really easy during an interview to tell when somebody's not being genuine and not being themselves. And again, that's you're selling yourself. This resume is supposed to, be the billboard that, attracts people to call you in on that interview. So the last thing you want to do is make a promise that you can't keep. So always be honest in that section, even the interest section.
Yeah, great point. So if you're a really good chess player, make sure you're really good.
Yes, exactly. You better be really good.
You better be ready.
Apparently he was.
Okay, tip number 8, use care. And I put this in here because I actually had a case about this, which I'll tell you about in a little bit. Use care in disclosing actual or potential confidential, proprietary, and or non-public information. So, I'm talking about basically just what it says. If there's trade secret information, or if it's just, financial information perhaps that hasn't been disclosed to the public. Let's say you worked in a prior job on some type of deal, but the deal maybe hasn't been made public. Anything confidential. And I did have a case about this, about a woman who was an analyst at a firm, and she was applying for other jobs, and she unknowingly disclosed information about a non-public financing deal. And she tried to anonymize it, but it didn't work. It was obvious who the companies involved were and what the transaction was, and it was a huge deal, and she got fired because of it. And then she tried to sue, and it just, it didn't work to her advantage because it was so patently clear that it was non-public information. So just make sure you check. Yeah, so just if you're ever unclear about whether it's truly confidential or non-public or whatever, or sensitive, check with your employer or supervisor, whoever, if you're working for a professor to do research, just check with them first. The same thing goes for writing samples. I had to do this. I interned at the U.S. Attorney's Office in D.C. when I was a 1L, and my writing sample that I submitted with my application packet involved a minor, a case involving abuse of a minor. So it had to be heavily redacted, and I made sure that my supervisor looked at it before I sent it out. So just be mindful of that kind of thing. And if you do think of that, which you should, hopefully with this webinar, it also will help you stand out as having good judgment and having the forethought to kind of vet those materials before you put them in the public space.
That's a really good point.
Okay.
I mean, I don't have anything to follow up on that, but I mean, like, that's a really good point, because especially if you're spending a summer this summer, getting some experience and going to Morgan Lewis or going to another legal employer, you are going to be exposed to sensitive, confidential information, and the last thing you would ever want to do is disclose that. Especially to a potential employer who's going to say, like, okay, well, you're disclosing it for this guy. I can't wait to see what you're going to say about me, and my clients, for the next job you look for. So it's not where you want to be.
Mm-hmm. Second to last tip on resumes is I recommend updating. Don might have a different timetable for this, but I recommend updating your resume at least every 6 months. Otherwise, you'll forget what you've accomplished during that time. So you should I also recommend keeping a running list of what you accomplish. Maybe you're good enough to just update your resume then and there, but if you have just like a bullet point list of things that you're working on and awards and accolades, whatever, that's helpful to just plop into your resume later when you're ready to send it out. And the reason for this is that you just never know when an opportunity may arise. You might grab coffee or network or meet someone at an event, and they might have an opportunity for you that's ready. And they might say, well, just shoot me your resume later tonight. And if you don't have that updated, you'll do like I've done before, which is like, oh, crap, now I have to go back and like think about dates and times and what was the name of that case and what did I exactly work on and what was the result and spend the time to update the resume, and then you're constantly worried about typos and grammar and whether you missed something. So just try to keep it going, and that way you always have your resume handy if an opportunity should arise, and you can just shoot it off to that person or whoever you're networking with.
Yeah, and I'm a big believer of the saying that the world doesn't wait for passive people. So when somebody says, hey, you sound like a perfect fit, you should shoot me your resume tonight. Like, you want to be able to shoot that resume within the next hour to folks, because you want to take advantage of that opportunity. A lot of the times things get filled pretty quickly. So that's really good advice, and I'll be the first to say that I haven't updated my resume in years. So the best laid plans sometimes don't pan out, but I'm not looking for a job either yet.
And also, I guess that also makes me think of, Don, like LinkedIn. Make sure you give your LinkedIn profile. I'm actually horrible at this because I unfortunately don't use LinkedIn to its full potential, but I see how other people do, and it's a hugely valuable resource. But if you are on LinkedIn, and all of you should be, make sure you refresh your skills, your work experience, any accomplishments that you've had, frequently, so that people can see that and it's up to date.
Right. And I would be remiss to say, if I didn't turn you guys on to, and I think I showed you, Chelsea, the Law Preview Job Network, which we started over Thanksgiving. And what in addition to the opportunities that Morgan Lewis has posted on there, and some of the other firms that we work with, if you guys haven't looked at it, I think you guys should have received an email about it, but it's jobnetwork.lawpreview.com. And, you want to keep your profile on that thing up to date, because what I'm finding is, having talked to recruiters of the firms that we work with, is that they are actually calling those, like, they're basically going in there in, viewing profiles now to invite people to come for OCI in 6 months. And as people are going through and searching that, just like they're searching LinkedIn, but this is a little bit more targeted in terms of, it's really designed for legal recruiters to find law students. You don't want to just set up your resume or set up your profile and then not attach your most recent transcript, or not attach, not include that you were, invited to join the law review, or you're the the moot court octa finalist, or whatever the achievement is. You want to keep that up to date, because I know that the firms are data mining that thing for other employers or other employees, I should say.
Great point, Don. Okay, and so this brings us to our last and final tip for resumes, which is bring copies of your resumes to your interview. Hopefully you all have some type of, leather portfolio or, other type of portfolio where you can put your, application materials that you've submitted, like your resume, your writing sample. Maybe you have a transcript as well, and that's just an easy way to carry things to your resume. Paper copies, I like to put them on resume paper. Resume paper is like a thicker, kind of coarser type of paper than your regular white paper that you feed through a printer. I just think it's more professional, sturdier. This tip is especially important too if there's been some type of update to your resume in between the time you submitted it and the time that you interview, or alas, if there's been a typo and there wasn't a way for you to correct it before your interview. And the way I would deal with a typo, by the way, on your resume, is to just confront it head on and say, I realize that, that my date of employment at this position is incorrect. My apologies. I've updated it. Here's a more recent copy of my resume. And then you're done. You've owned responsibility for the typo. It's been corrected, and now they have the right version. I also like a paper copy of the resume because I don't like looking at resumes electronically. If they are given to me electronically, I usually print them out. I'll highlight things that I want to talk about. Having a candidate bring paper copies of their resume into the interview is also kind of a test to me to see if they're prepared. So when a candidate walks through my door, I usually say, hey, how are you? Do you have a paper copy of your resume? And sometimes they don't. And, it just doesn't, for me, it's a demerit because, I'm expecting them to come prepared with all of their application materials. Same thing with your writing sample. I would bring extra copy of your writing sample as well as your transcript.
Damn, do you also have a chessboard in your office, Chelsea, too? Jeez, look at all those tests you got the kids walking in already feeling like, oh, Jesus Christ, I didn't bring my resume. No, but it's true. Listen, you're hiring a professional. This is the same kid who's going to show up in your office, hopefully, the following, the summer or in September when they start as an associate. And when you're giving them an assignment, you want them to show up with a legal pad and a pen, it's not always common these days. So that's a good test. I don't think that there's, any fault in giving them a demerit. I thought I'd make a little bit of fun of you, but that's it.
Everything is a test.
Yeah.
But, hopefully the tips that we've shared and some of the insights that we've shared will give you the tools that you need to successfully write a really good resume. And again, utilize your resources at law school. Go to career services. Talk to your counselors. Talk to your professors. Ask them to review your resume. Ask them to proofread. Ask them if it tells a coherent story, if there's anything that you can do to improve it. Send us your resumes. Many of you have already, and hopefully you've gotten some good feedback so far, but we're always here to help and happy to review those for you. So I just wanted to give you a glimpse at the resume that I updated for purposes of this webinar. So here's my resume. You can see I included a professional summary at the top, which just highlights that my expertise is labor and employment law. It is, I say team-oriented employment attorney, and some of the skills that I have are highlighted front and center. Then I have my education. I chose a few things to highlight there, each of which I can talk about in more detail. Then there's a big work experience section, and I've highlighted again my key cases, my counseling experience, all of those things I'm prepared to talk about in the interview. And then at the very end, instead of doing an interest section, I've highlighted some of the organizations that I'm involved at Morgan Lewis and elsewhere, including P2P. So this is one page. This is all 12-point font with the exception of my name at the top. So you can do it. You can fit everything on one page. And you can also highlight, in a professional way, what your skills and accomplishments are, and then have a great story, a great brand to tell in the actual interview. Does anyone have any questions, any comments, anything else before we jump into interviewing? Nope.
I think we're good to go.
Okay, so let's talk about top 10 interviewing tips. The first one I think is probably the most important, which is preparation is key. Prepare, prepare, prepare. And that not only means practicing questions or anticipating questions, but also knowing the basics, like the date, the time, and the location of the interview and who you're interviewing with. When I was doing 2L interviews, I accidentally mixed up one of my days. I was supposed to be in DC interviewing, and I just totally mixed up the day, and I missed it. And it was incredibly embarrassing. And I had to apologize. I had to write emails. I had to make calls. And fortunately, they gave me another interview slot, but, I didn't get that job. And I think it was obvious why. I missed, the interview. That's the first test. So don't do that. Know exactly when it is. Get there early. Also know who your interviewers are. You'll probably get a schedule the night before, maybe the morning of. Sometimes that changes the day of, depending on people's availability. But to the extent you can, research them. Research the firm beforehand. Know which practice groups they have. Or, if it's a public service organization, make sure that you know how that organization is structured, how it works. Check out the news, practice areas, major cases, major clients. Now, I'm not saying that you have to create this crazy Excel spreadsheet that will overwhelm you and just be totally burdensome, but make sure you have a couple talking points that shows that you did prepare, that you're knowledgeable, that you, took the time to do some research on your own time.
Let me ask you this, Chelsea. In terms of Morgan Lewis, do you guys send out the interview list? Like, would I know that I'm going to interview with you prior to my interview?
You would, and then what happens always is that it changes the day of because people have conflicts, people cancel, that kind of thing. But we usually try to give interviewees the schedule beforehand. Okay.
So do people come, with a lot of information on you personally, in terms of, I mean, maybe not like stalking you, but, knowing, knowing last case you worked on, checking your unupdated, LinkedIn file or profile or, how does it, like, do you get the sense that people have done a little bit of recon on you personally?
I do. I mean, it varies. Some people have done research than others, but, I'm not saying they have to do a deep dive. They don't have to look at my Instagram account, which is private anyway, or even my LinkedIn. But, they know the basics, which practice group I'm in. They know which law school I went to. They know maybe a case that I worked on, or a something that's in my firm bio. Or they know a couple zingers about the firm. They know, this stat, or they know that we have an office here. It doesn't have to be extensive. It just has to be enough for them to make a conversation about it or to ask me a question about it.
Right.
Okay. We can kind of breeze through tip number 2 because this is a counterpoint to the tip that we saw earlier with resume writing, but make sure you review, again, all of your application materials before you get into the interview. So your resume is fair game, your writing sample is fair game, your transcript is fair game. So make sure that, you have talking points about all of those things. And, if you submitted a writing sample, you know what the issue was, you know what you argued, you know what the basic legal framework is. Now, for your transcripts, if you're concerned about a bad grade or maybe something, you just didn't do your best, that's fine. That is totally fine. And to be completely honest with you, grades don't matter for me as much as how a candidate presents themselves and how they write. I could care less about grades. I think they're somewhat, they're just not a good indicator of performance. But if you are concerned about a bad grade, my best strategy is to be upfront about it, especially if you think you're going to be asked about it. So sometimes that's disguised in a question like, what was your most challenging class? Now, there's two ways to answer that question. You could point to a really good grade. Let's say you got an A in Civ Pro. You're really proud of that because you worked hard, you understood the concepts, you got along with the professor, you just crushed it. That's a perfectly fine answer. You don't even have to touch the bad grade. That's fine. Or you could take the bad grade on your transcript and say, I really struggled in con law. I got a B-, I got a C+ in that class. Things just weren't clicking for me. A lot of the analysis was very difficult to understand. I hadn't developed the right study skills. Whatever the case may be, just don't blame the professor because it's not the professor's fault, even though sometimes it is. Don't blame the professor. Mm-hmm. And then turn it back to something positive. Like, even though, I struggled with that class, in the next semester in Con Law 2, I got a really good grade because I realized what the concepts were. I took extra time with my professor to go over the cases. I studied really hard and developed new reading habits or new outlining habits. And ultimately, I succeeded. So in that response, you've turned a somewhat negative blemish on your transcript into something positive. So that question always comes up when we do workshops, how to deal with quote unquote bad grades. And right. That's price down on that.
Yeah, and listen, it's one. Yeah, and look, it's like anything. Like I tell my kids, I'm like, look, you got to run towards your problems, and if there's a grade that sticks out like a sore thumb, you almost want to call it out and be honest and be vulnerable in the interview to say like, hey, you know what? Listen, trust in the states. Got to be honest with you, it wasn't my thing. However, I actually really grew to like it towards the end, and like even though I didn't get the greatest grade on it, I found myself devoting that X amount of time to this, and I really did actually enjoy the class. It just doesn't reflect it in the grade. Then just be done with it, because there's not a lot you can hide from on a transcript, especially if it's just your 1L transcript. It's going to sit there, and there's only 2 semesters of work there.
Yep. Tip number 3: don't give canned response. Give thoughtful ones. I mean, easier said than done, because you don't know what you're going to be asked, right? But what you can do is think about some big questions, key questions that are probably bound to come up in the interview. For me, when I'm interviewing candidates, it's usually, why do you want to be in New York? What kind of law do you want to practice? What's your greatest strength? What makes you stand out as a candidate? Those are, very basic, general interview questions that are kind of across the board at many different jobs. I know my firm is doing more behavioral-based questions, so we'll hit you with some hypothetical questions that might, can be difficult to respond to. But I think if you give a thoughtful, genuine response that's articulate, that's where you really set yourself up for success. But I know a canned response when I see one. There's nothing really, it's not a bad thing. You're trying your best to prepare. And a lot of, at least in private firms, a lot of private firms do a lot of the same work. We have the same client base, we have the same practice group, so it's kind of hard to distinguish why you want to work at one firm versus another. But, you know, there are some questions that you can really think hard on before the interview. So, for instance, when I ask candidates, why do you want to be in New York? I don't want to hear, you know, New York City is the legal capital of the country, and, you know, New York City has so much energy and blah, blah, blah. I've heard those responses several times, and they
if you can make it there, you can make it anywhere, Chelsea. Come on, you know the song. Jesus.
It's so hard for me to hide my emotion too on my face. I mean, come up with something more original. Tell me, you know, that you like riding the subway, that you know, have some type of family connection there, that you like going to Broadway plays, that you know, never met a New Yorker you didn't like. I don't know, whatever it might be. Just think of a genuine
your fictitious fiance who, like, you know, the man or woman that you're in love with lives in New York. That's always a nice reason to to stay in the same city. And again, like, just, you know, harping like on that, not to harp on it too much, but like, be yourself. Like, you're not the best interviews that I ever had, either both, you know, when I was being interviewed and or when I was, you know, on law school campuses or had people come into my office and were interviewing me, were people who were just genuine people. Like, you know, you have to understand that if you made the cut to get to talk to Chelsea, right, you're smart enough. But somebody has already decided, whose expertise is in identifying, you know, good raw talent, has already decided that you're worth Chelsea's time. Rather than having her build towards, you know, her client, she can take an hour out of her day or 45 minutes out of her day and talk to you, right? And that's good use of the firm's time. So, you know, you've already made the cut. It's not about whether, you know, Chelsea's going to think you're smart enough. But, you know, Chelsea's just going to want to assess whether she would ever want to work with you, you know, and that you would fit in at the firm. And that's it. So just be yourself. And listen, if she ultimately decides, like, yeah, you know what, Don, you wouldn't fit in there, then it's probably, you're doing me a favor, right? That I wouldn't fit in there. If she thinks I wouldn't fit in there, then fine. I should be looking elsewhere too, because I would probably end up being unhappy there. So just be yourself.
Yes. And that type of, like, genuineness goes such a long way. Such a long way. So like Don said, be afraid to be yourself, you know, and that will help with some of the nerves and the anxiety as well.
Yeah.
Okay, number 4 is dress the part. Yeah.
No, Ged, I'm sorry. Yeah. No, Ged, you hit it. That's fine.
Okay. Tip number 4 is dress the part. Dress for success. So dress like an attorney. Dress like you already have the job at that firm or that public defender's office or that, you know, DA's office or wherever, corporation. Nothing too flashy, not too short, tight. It should be tasteful. It should be professional. I also would stay away from, you know, weird makeup, piercings. You know, if you have an obvious tattoo, I would try my best to cover it up. You know, same thing with hairstyles. Make sure that you're cleanly shaven. You don't look like you're unkempt or frazzled or disheveled. I had one candidate who was great. I think he, like, worked at Google. He had this impressive resume. Really interesting name as well. I won't share because that'll disclose who he is. But he had this hair. It was like a wave of hair over his head. There was so much of it, and it was like gelled down and waved over. And he would, like, flick it during the interview. And, you know, it was so distracting to me that I just couldn't take him seriously. I was like, I can't see you working here, not with that hair. Like, you just can't. I can't put you in front of my partners. I can't put you in front of a client. Like, it's just not going to work. So make sure you dress professionally when you show up to that interview. You might want to get some advice from career services as well if you're applying to specialized markets, especially for women. I hate to say this, but there's some old school rule that, in an interview in the South, you should only wear a dress suit and pantyhose. I would still break that rule today, but that you would look like a fool if you did that in New York, wearing pantyhose at least. Skirt suit is totally fine, but there's no need to wear pantyhose unless it's freezing as it is outside. In the summer, there's no need to do that. So just make sure you check with your career services if you're applying to maybe smaller, more conservative markets. They have tons of institutional knowledge about little quirks like that.
I can't speak for the pantyhose advice. I didn't even know that was a cure for cold legs. I had no clue. So thank you, Chelsea. I learned something new every one of these webinars. It's just a matter of what the information I walk away with, and how useful that will be for me. Never. But just for the couple of guys that are on the webinar right now, you can't go wrong with a navy blue suit and a white shirt and an unoffensive, no naked ladies tie, something that's just a very plain pattern. It sounds boring and it may not suit your personality on Friday and Saturday, but for an interview, you just, again, all you want to do, you're pretty much in there. They're spending time on you. You just want to exude great judgment. And I will just also say this because my nephew just got his first suit, and he's a junior at Babson College, and I was like, look, whatever you get, you always want to have it, spend the extra money and have it tailored, so it actually fits you, because there's such a difference when somebody walks in, and it'll make a difference to you and how you feel, by walking in. In a tailored suit that fits you perfectly. And it's, it might seem like, too much extra money at the time, but I promise you it's short money. And to definitely do that. It'll make you feel better and you'll look better and you won't offend anybody. That's all I got.
And I love how you said exude confidence. I mean, that's really the theme kind of throughout this presentation, is that you want all of your materials, you want your responses in your interviews to really show that good judgment and the confidence that you have in yourself to be a great attorney, because you all will be great attorneys. You just have to get to that point of knowing it yourself and acting that way as well.
And sometimes you just have to, and I'm just gonna step back because, Chelsea, I don't know if you ever have fallen victim to the fraud, the fraud syndrome, but even sometimes to this day, sometimes you don't feel like you're qualified, or you don't feel like I remember showing up for my first interview at Sullivan and Cromwell, and I was like, Jesus Christ, how long before these guys figure out I don't know anything, and feeling like I was just about to be discovered and unearthed as the biggest fraud in the legal community. So you're not the only one who feels that. So you want to put yourself in a position where your materials, yourself, everything that you're putting out there exudes good judgment, and you have that confidence walking in, even though you might feel like a complete fraud inside. You got to fake it until you make it.
Yes, and there's actually, I was hoping you used that phrase, Don. There's actually an excellent podcast. I guess it's actually a TED Talk. I forget the woman's name. I can find it, dig it up. But she
about faking it until you make it.
Yeah, but she says fake it until you become it, and she gives you tips on how to actually become whatever it is you're seeking to become, and really making that part of your personality. So
yeah, and your daily mantra, whatever it takes. I mean, I'm still thinking it. Trust me. So you can ask my kids; they would agree. They would agree with you. I'm the biggest fraud there is. All right.
All right. Number 5, your goal in the interview is to have a conversation, not be interrogated. and hopefully none of you are in an interrogation situation in an interview or otherwise. You're there to learn more about that organization, that firm, and the interviewer just as much as they are there to learn about you. And so there should be hopefully a natural conversation that takes place between you and your interviewer. Sometimes it happens organically, sometimes it doesn't, and it's a little bit strained, but try to get to that point where it's, a flowing conversation. You're asking questions, they're asking questions, throughout. I would also try to think of some really good questions before the interview. It could be specific about that particular person. It could be specific about a case they worked on. It could be more general. I was trying to think of some of the really good questions that I've been asked recently, but nothing came to mind. But, make sure you're prepared. Make sure that you can contribute to the conversation just as much as the, interviewer is asking you questions and learning about yourself. And again, sometimes that won't necessarily happen. Sometimes you won't click with the interviewer, and you'll know that. That's okay. That's just one opportunity. You're not going to ace every single interview. You're going to bomb some of them, and that's totally fine. I mean, obviously, don't have that mentality when you step into the room, but, you have to be realistic about, what's going to happen. And just, if that does happen, if you end up not connecting with someone, or maybe you gave a response that you later regret, that's fine. Move on. Don't dwell on it. Take the next opportunity to do even better, and rebuild your confidence.
And I'll just two pieces of advice here from somebody who I try to view myself as a good conversationalist, and I will say it comes from a lot of practice. Don't let the first time that you need to have a conversation with somebody be during an interview. You constantly have to make small talk with people, whether it's a networking event, whether it's an interview situation, whether it's somebody that you just met off of Tinder. You want to come across as somebody who is, you're not going to struggle to pull teeth and get a conversation out of this person. So have some interesting things in your back pocket. Like, listen to the top 10 TED Talks, right? That pretty much everybody may have listened to, and internalize some of those things, and maybe work them into conversation casually before you get to the interview. But you definitely certainly don't want to be striking up a conversation and practicing your small talk when you're sitting across the table or across the desk from Chelsea. The other thing I will also mention is look around the office. If you see the person has a picture of his or her wife or kids. Oh, how old are your kids? Trust me, it makes life a lot easier, and people love to talk about their kids. So switch the conversation around. Have it not be an interrogation. Ask them some questions. Oh, you have 2 kids. That's got to be hard. Is it hard, Chelsea, working at a firm like Morgan & Lewis and trying to balance a work life? How do you do it? And all of a sudden, boom, you're off to the races having a conversation where Chelsea's actually leading the discussion.
Yeah, that's great. Those are great examples. Okay, the number 6 tip we have for you for interviewing, and this goes back to one of the tips we gave for resume writing, is to have your own story, have your own brand. Again, pretend that you're on Shark Tank. Pretend that you're sitting in front of, Mark Cuban, and you have to pitch your business case. That's essentially the same thing as what you have to do in an interview. What do you bring to the table? How are you going to convince me that you're the right candidate for the job? How are you going to convince me that you have the skills and grit to live in New York City and also be a successful associate? What relevant experience do you have that will make you successful here? So again, when you're putting together your application materials, when you're reflecting back on everything that you've accomplished and where you see yourself heading, try to think of the top skills that make you stand out, that give you some type of edge above other candidates, and then weave that into your interview responses. One of the examples that I gave earlier, the girl who forgot to put that she was a founding, a founder of this company that she created. We discussed her resume and her application materials, and we did a mock interview. And it became very apparent that, her skills were being an entrepreneur and being proactive and a go-getter. And I was like, look, you have developed through your business all these business skills, and you need to highlight those, because a law firm, at least, from my world, is a business. And, we do practice law. We're litigators, at least in my group, but we're also concerned about getting business. So make sure that you talk about that in your interviews, and make sure that you highlight all of these experiences that you have that show you have the skill set to succeed at a firm. So give that some thought as you're putting together everything and preparing for your interviews down the road. So number 7 is an obvious one, and Dawn mentioned it just a moment ago, but practice. Practice, practice, practice. If you're not a naturally good public speaker, or if you've just never been in an interview setting before, or if you don't like the sound of your own voice answering questions, practice. A good test of this is cold calling. Do you like being cold called in law school? Some people surprisingly do. It made me a nervous wreck. It gave me so much anxiety just hearing my own voice, having to answer a question in front of a lot of people, talking directly to the professor, being on your toes there. It's a very hard skill to develop. So if you're not naturally good at kind of conversing with people in that type of intimate setting, practice. Practice in front of the mirror, with friends, with career services, because it can be very awkward just being in front of someone and talking about yourself. So again, if you're not naturally comfortable with interviewing, get comfortable. And that comes with practice and also experience. The more interviews you do, the better you get at it over time. Okay, top tip number 8 is to network and use interviews as opportunities for feedback. So try to view each of your interactions, whether it's in the interview or with a recruiter or with an alum or someone who currently works at that organization where you're trying to get a job, view them as networking opportunities. You might not connect with everyone that you interview with, and like I said before, you might bomb some interviews, and that's okay. If you don't happen to get any feedback, or if you don't happen to get an offer or any follow-up from that particular opportunity, ask for feedback. Stay in contact with the interviewers, and the recruiters, and ask for that feedback so that you can improve in the next round. If you did really connect with an interviewer, stay connected with them. Send them a note at the holidays, that time of year. Everyone loves those. Everyone loves getting a happy holidays note, happy new year, just checking in, how are you? Just wanted to see if there are any opportunities, at your organization, would like to stay in touch. That's totally fine. And again, you never know when other opportunities will arise just from those networking moments. It's so important. That's how we get jobs now. We network. Everyone is, of a certain caliber when their resumes come to us when we're recruiting. Everyone's smart. Everyone works really hard. Everyone is interested in being a lawyer. But it's really, that networking extra push that sometimes gets you an opportunity at the firm or the organization.
Just playing off of that, so you interview with Chelsea, and you might want to tap into her network. If you feel like you've hit it off with her, you might want to send her a LinkedIn invite. And I guess there's certain statistics out there that say that if you send one out without any kind of a note, it's something like 30% more likely not to get noticed. But it would be a good opportunity to say, like, hey, Chelsea, listen, I really enjoyed our conversation, last week at Morgan Lewis. Never really thought about employment law before, other than, all the times I've been fired, haha. But I would love to, just keep in touch, and if it's possible to, join you on LinkedIn and reach out with any questions. I would love to be able to do that. Would you be comfortable adding me to your network? Boom, you're in, and all of a sudden you have access to, all of, Chelsea's, network, which is I'm sure is a lot more expensive than yours.
Yeah, that's a great point. Okay, number 9, we're towards the end here. Number 9 is be confident, be yourself. We mentioned that before. You want to exude confidence, and you also just want to be yourself. You want to be a genuine person. We want to work with real people, not robots. So being genuine and true to yourself is very important. On the confidence part, I mean, obviously you want to exude that type of confidence, but you don't want to be cocky. You don't want to be arrogant. You don't want to speak out of turn. One point I forgot to mention before is just when it comes to conversation topics, be careful of politics or anything controversial. You might have particular views about current events and might feel very comfortable talking about those in front of your group of friends, but your interviewer might not necessarily share the same views. So just use caution in bringing up those topics, and my opinion would be to just stay away from them unless you have a clear sign that they want to go there. On the be yourself point, I mean, if you can, whatever that means to you, if you're quirky, if you insert humor, if you're sarcastic, that's great. I mean, obviously you have to use your judgment there and not offend anyone that you're interviewing with. But I love someone who's, self-deprecating or sarcastic or funny in the interview. Speaking of interests, so not everyone is an avid reader. Not every attorney loves to read and read and read. But I love watching Netflix or, anything on Amazon, anything on HBO, I have all of the channels. I love TV. It's just something about me. So if you've watched a great Netflix show, let me know, and that's a way that we can talk about, that we can add some levity to the conversation.
Okay, are you sitting down, Chelsea? Have you watched You on Netflix?
Yeah, I started watching it.
Is that insane?
It's so good.
Don't
tell me
it's so funny because I don't know. Trust me, I'm only on episode 3, but now I'm fielding questions from my 80-year-old mother who's saying this is the greatest series I've ever watched, and my 13-year-old son who's like, I'm on episode 8. This is insane. So if you are in need of something else, the other one I would recommend also, and I watched it last weekend, just in case you want to know, Life Itself on Amazon was probably one of the best movies I've watched in the last 5 or 6 years. So,
really?
And that's an Amazon Prime. If you haven't seen that, sit down, grab a box of tissues, and you'll be like, wow, that was really, really well done. Really beautiful story, really well told. All right, number 10. Let's get these kids off the phone.
Okay, number 10. Sorry, we went over. Okay, last one. Don't forget to follow. Make sure you send a thank you email after your interview. I personally like to take a business card from the interviewer, and I'll write down a fact or topic that we discussed on the back, and then I use that in my email follow-up later to personalize it a little bit. Same thing with recruiters. If you connected, you don't have to do it with every single recruiter, but if you particularly connected with someone or they were really nice to you or they helped you with something, make sure you send them a quick follow-up. Thank you goes a long way. And then you're at the top of my list. We remember you. We have your email in our inboxes. It's a good way to network and keep in touch. So that's all we have.
I think it's a great thing. And do your thank you notes on our packets. When I was working with the employment committee at my firm, all the thank you notes would be stapled or be part of the file. They didn't just sit on Chelsea's desk. Maybe they do at Morgan Lewis. But they all made it through. So seeing a handwritten thank you note come through, I was like, whoa, wow! It's like penmanship, and they're proud of it. That always blew me away. But then, like, you talk to some folks, and they're like, "Oh, you know, you don't really have to send a thank you." And I'm more of the person that say, like, have it be a thank you in the guise of, Chelsea, I really enjoyed talking to you, and you know, thank you for some of your suggestions about about my career at Morgan Lewis, or why the other firm that I mentioned was a horrible choice for me, or whatever. And I'd love to stay in touch, and just thanks a lot. I really enjoyed meeting you, and I hope to see you again soon. And that goes so far. It just goes so far.
And the first thing I do, John, with thank you, is I forward it to the recruiters. I'm like, here you go.
Yep.
Add to the file.
Yep.
You need to send handwritten notes unless you really, really want to, and you want to take the time to do that. I mean, I love a handwritten note. I'm from the South. That's like the key to my heart as a Southern belle, is sending a handwritten note.
Right.
But that's not necessary when you're doing tons of interviews and meeting tons of people, and we all read email anyway. So save those for especially people.
I agree.
But I think that's all we have for our webinar. Does anyone have, I know we kept you over, sorry about that, but we had a lot of personal anecdotes to share that will hopefully help you along the way. Does anyone on the line have any last questions or comments? You can always email them to us separately as well if you don't want to ask them on the webinar.
I think they probably just already switched over and started watching You on Netflix.
They're out.
Could be it. All right, Chelsea, thank you so much for doing this. It was a lot of fun. I never got to work with you on one of these. I really enjoyed it.
Great. I really enjoyed it too. I'm going to end the webcast, and thanks again.
Thanks. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Chelsea, I think you have to hit the stop stream button. On the upper right-hand corner, there should be like a red button.
Yeah. I did that, and that